Welcome to Space Rocks Uplink. Mark, an absolute pleasure to see you once again. How have you been doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Apparently, I'm out at Jupiter on Europa, according to the background. So it's a little chilly out there, but actually, in the real world, autumn is definitely upon us, and the nights are drawing in, as they say. So it seems crazy that we've been doing this since April, all the way over the summer, and here we are, down in the autumn already. Crazy.
Indeed, and we're not retreading any paths. In fact, it seems that for this episode, we're going headlong into one that we haven't really touched on as directly before, which of course I guess is the interconnection, the collision of space and art as a pure form of expression.
Yeah, and that's actually why I chose this background. This is a fairly famous picture by Chesley Bonstall, who is one of the sort of the great-great-grandfathers of space art back in the golden age of science fiction, even before humans went into space, even before the first satellites. What would the solar system look like if you were on Europa, if you could see spacecraft flying overhead, if you could look down on the Earth? And I think it's true that art has played an incredibly important role in the history of spaceflight, pre-spaceflight, and even post, as we're in it now, in bringing another representation to the sorts of things that we think we might see out there. We're there, humans are there, but our robot probes have gone much further. They can take pictures. But trying to place humans in a space environment or beyond, elsewhere in the universe, through a black hole or something, that relies on artists and working maybe with scientists, maybe working purely from the imagination. So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to talk to a couple of artists during this Uplink episode and see where we go from there.
Indeed.
Yeah, so, sorry, you edit that little bit out where I almost said this afternoon, but
it's easily done. And of course, I suppose our guests today are incredibly interesting in that regard, because I guess, like so many people, I grew up with artists' impression of more than actual photography of things, more than actual renditions. And so I suppose, there's an inextricable link between art and illustration, of course, in astronomy, just as a science itself, just, before people were able to take photographs. But what's so interesting about the people that we're bringing on today, Aoife van Linden as the erstwhile artist in residence for ISA, and Cathrin Machin, of course, who's just this absolutely skyrocketing popularizer of space imagery, with her magnificent art. Two people that have taken the art a little further, and I guess as we're about to find out, in one of their cases at least, in a very explosive way indeed. So we should probably bring them aboard and see what they have to say. Kat and Aoife, how are you guys doing today? Are you receiving?
I am. Thank you.
Fantastic. And Aoife, I think we're just going to unmute you. I'm not sure if your microphone is on.
Mute.
Splendid.
There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, here we are, and thank you so much for joining Space Rocks Uplink. So just before you joined, I perhaps giving away a bit about myself, is my earliest exposure to anything to do with the great beyond was probably less a photograph, more an artist's impression of, because there's so much about the world out there that we've relied on artists to bring to life and so on. And so in a way, I think perhaps it's a taken for granted but essential part of our understanding of outer space. So I wondered if I could just begin broadly with each of you, starting with Kat. How did you first begin? What was your first exposure? When did you become interested in space?
My earliest experience was in my backyard with my dad and my mum, and looking at the Perseid meteor showers with these big, heavy 70s binoculars, and they were sort of smelt of old leather and were like solid glass and like very heavy. And of course, I didn't see any meteors because it's super light polluted, but I did manage to hit myself in the face and gave myself 2 massive black eyes, which didn't seem to put me off the whole process, which is such a surprise. But I did look at the moon, obviously totally unstabilized, so incredibly shaky. But I just remember seeing it up close and seeing the craters and just thinking how amazing it was. And I think also, very early on, my mom is obsessed by watching documentaries, and, and I think that I know a lot of people who have watched things, such as Cosmos and those series, and how that's really formed their lives. I actually can't bring any to mind because I suspect I was too young, but it's sort of in those 1 to 5 year olds, and I've always been super obsessed. I think the other thing was that I was given a pot of glow in the dark paint, and naturally I decided to paint stars on my ceiling because there's nothing more fabulous than glow in the dark stars, really, I would say, and apart from the real ones, of course. And it's kind of a funny scenario. I remember I was going to write my name and then the boy that I fancied, but then I thought that would never last. So I just wrote my own name on there, thinking my name and the stars, they'll go on forever. That's my earliest memories.
And I just wanted to kind of throw it out there, speaking as a 43-year-old, those glow-in-the-dark stars never get old.
They don't.
Indeed. So how about yourself, Aoife? Where did it all begin for you?
I guess I don't ever remember not being interested in the stars and space. My first 5 years were in rural Ireland in West Cork, and the stars are incredible there. And I just remember my parents raising us to believe that we are connected to the universe, we're part of the universe. And so those stars seemed very much a part of me. And we moved to London when I was 5. And I remember as I was getting older, when I had my own room upstairs in the top of the house, I used to move the bed at night sometimes when I had one of those nights where I was awake, where you can't sleep, and just try and let the moonlight shine on me all night because I thought it would give me magical powers.
Well, it obviously worked. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I was always interested, so I always used to do things like buy books that are relevant. Later on, I did a little cosmology course in a city lit college in London, and so while I was doing arts and everything, I was always keeping up and try. I mean, I didn't do physics. I did A-level art, chemistry, maths. Because that's what I wanted to do. I had no career plan associated with what I wanted to do. I just said, that's what I want to do, so I'm going to do it. And in some ways, I guess I had hoped that those things would maybe allow me to keep understanding the parts of science that I wanted to understand. So maybe that would help a little bit if I wanted to know more about the stars, or if I wanted to know more about all the weird and wonderful things in the world that were interesting. Yeah.
But
and my dad's a sailor. So the stars are very important in terms of location. And I think I remember him talking a lot about the stars, and meteorology and things like that are all very important in sailing. So that was a big influence as well.
Yeah, I think my father was a sailor as well. I'm getting feedback, actually. Is that coming from somebody?
No, you're okay now.
Okay. Yeah, so in a sense, I think he tried to get us to learn to sail, all of us, when we were young, and we lived right in the middle of the country, so we ended up going around in basically a little dinghy in a clay pit which was flooded, so it wasn't exactly the most exciting sort of option. But then 2 of us became pilots. I think he was kind of disappointed by that we didn't become sailors, that we became pilots. But let me follow up actually on what you just said there, because of course, for all that you had that space in you from when you were young, it's not what you ended up doing. So give us a quick insight into your sort of paths back to it, because Kat, you came sort of back to this relatively recently with the painting, and Aoife, you came to us only a few years ago. So, what else did you do in those intervening years? So Kat.
So I primarily avoided being an artist. I tried to do everything to not be an artist, which I failed miserably at, obviously. But in those intervening years, I studied engineering, mechanical, specializing in thermofluids, which I absolutely hated because even though I love mathematics and physics, I was sort of probably too into going out and partying and having fun. If we're being like super honest, that's really the basis of it. But also I had this to really understand the story, I suppose, deep down, I was always a natural born artist. But I grew up with the opinion that artists were failures, or, you know, they weren't successful. And my brother and sister are 8 years and 10 years older than me. And they'd always ask my parents for money. Obviously, back at that age, I was too young to ask for anything because I couldn't go out and buy anything because I was too young. But I remember forming the opinion that I really wanted to be successful in life. So I spent all this time avoiding it. So the first thing I did to try and be a rebel against being an artist was study engineering, because I thought that's exactly what artists don't do. So I went to Loughborough University in the UK, and obviously I just went into it with the wrong opinion. You know, it was the wrong reason to do something. But then shortly after, I was offered a job in the video games industry. I'd been making 3D models on the side since I was about 8 years old. I was very fortunate that my brother was really into 3D animation and that kind of stuff. So I used to copy him, but as an 8-year-old making 3D animations, I'd make like 3D tanks, which had like ice cream serving hatches on the back, so that on the battlefield you could have a Mr. Whippy soft serve, because that was the logical thing to do. You know, and like I built like, you know, dinosaurs out of teapots and those kind of things. But so I went through the video games industry for 10 years, and I started making special effects. Actually, virtual explosions is what I was specializing in, which is cool. Interesting. Yeah. So anything that was explosive and interesting, I'd create all the art and all the particle effects and those kind of things. And then I ended up going through the ranks because I was actually very unhappy, strangely enough, because I thought, well, actually I felt like there was something missing, but I wasn't sure what it was. It actually turned out that it was just being a raw creative and an artist, whereas what I was doing was super, super technical. So I thought, well, I'm unhappy, so where should I go? I was like, well, go to the top and then I'll be happy. But then I got to be an executive producer, and I realized I was still unfulfilled, but now I was really stressed and unfulfilled, which I think was a great move. So I started my games industry working on Warhammer Online, actually the classic, right? You have to be the right kind of nerd for that.
Oh, don't worry, we got loads of them following us. You're exactly the right kind of nerds.
I love you guys. And then the very last game I did was a Warhammer 40k game. Again, so like the dystopian sort of sci-fi aspect of it. And you know, when I was coming out of there, I'd obviously got to this point where I was running a studio of 600 people, and I was just breaking at the seams because, you know, the work, we have this thing called crunch period at the end of video games where, you know, so the reason why it happens is that 9 months away from launch, you have to book all the magazine slots because, you know, print media is so slow. You go, yes, okay, 9 months, it's going to be fine. I'll book my stuff. But then in the meantime, you know, a driver update, you get like an operating system update, everything breaks, you know, everything sets on fire, you're on fire, everywhere is on fire. And you're trying to like cram through all of these final bug fixes, patches and stuff that you thought would work. But obviously, you know, in software development, when you're trying to push the boundaries, it's always very difficult. So then you end up working 7 days a week for 3 months. Doing insane hours. I think we were like clocking in somewhere between 12 and 16 hours a day. And so yeah, it was probably one of the hardest times of my life, I would say. And at the end of that was a Steam PC, and they were like, right, well done everybody, on to mobile. And I was like, see ya. But then I had this fundamental breakdown because I'd spent a decade building this career in the video games industry. I got to the top. Now I couldn't get employed in a lower position because I was highly overqualified for everything that I would go for. And I just couldn't deal with that level of stress. I think it's very unhealthy for any human being to go through that. And so I didn't know what to do with myself. So, you know, I started a company cleaning, I was like cleaning toilets and scrubbing people's houses because I'd never worked I'd gone from a high paying executive job, and I was like, I can't go back into software. What do I even do with myself? So I just went around and I tried a lot of different things. But one of the things is that I went to a retreat in Peru where they did ayahuasca and had the whole mind bending enlightening experience where I was just blown into the cosmos. And I connected with that bit when I was very, very young. And I was like, wow, space is so incredible. I used to sit and look out of my window when I was a kid and ask the question, like, why is there not nothing? Like, it was mind bending that anything exists at all. And I really wanted to answer that question. And I remember sitting in all these ceremonies thinking, like, why does anything exist? Where did it all come from? And spending all this time. And I just was very compelled to get it down in some way, but the words couldn't seem to summate it very well. So I started painting. And I just started painting, every couple hours every Saturday as I was doing all this other work for the next sort of 6 months. And my friends had asked, oh, can you run an exhibition? And I thought, well, there's absolutely nothing to lose at this point. I was working scrubbing toilets, which is fine, and it's a great job, but probably not for me as much. And so then I was like, well, I was very broke because I was at the time getting married, and which is, of course, probably the most expensive time of your life. So, happiest day of your life, give me all your money, is right? And
I'm just checking. My family's just through the wall there. They're not listening to any of this. Okay.
So I was doing that, and then 8 months out of a high-paying executive role, and so I thought I'd run a Kickstarter, and I thought, right, we're going to raise $4,000, hire a room in Sydney. And at this point, I'd been DJing for a long time. So my number one priority was like making a really good party. So I was like, fill it with space and alcohol. And we're going to get someone down from the university to talk about space. And we're going to get everybody drunk. And we're going to talk about space. And that sounds amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah. So actually, my whole career is all based around the fact that one day I accidentally made the decision to get my friends drunk and show them space, and then like 4 years later, I'm still kind of on that.
Unfortunately, that's the problem with Uplink. It's not the same as the live events because there's no drinking. Well, I mean, you can be if you want, but we can't at least share a drink. So Aoife, the same for you. So a different journey, I suspect, but there was. But if you end up blowing things up at the end of it, it's got to have an exciting denouement.
Yeah, there's definitely a potential creative synergy. We may have identified. Yeah, but please go ahead. So where did it all begin for you, and when did you go from being enthusiastic to actually doing what you do now?
Oh, well, I mean, I did after my A-levels. I chose. I wanted to do both art and science. So I really wanted to keep doing science. I really wanted to keep doing art. But there wasn't really that kind of environment, or at least there wasn't anywhere that I knew of. And bear in mind, when I was leaving my A-levels, there wasn't really the internet. You couldn't just go on to the internet and search for art science organizations or anything like that. You had to know about them or look in the yellow pages or, try to find things that are connected to you. So in the end, I made the decision to do art. And I thought that gave me a lot more freedom. And I knew that if I did science, if I did chemistry, then it's very specific. You'll end up working for people who, for companies who have to fund research, etc. And I think that I didn't want to get into all of that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do art. And if I can manage and see how that goes. So I did my art A-level. I did my art foundation. And I also did my degree at St. Martin's, and I did the first course that was a multidisciplinary course. So up until then, courses were sculpture, painting, and so this was, it was called art and design, and you had to be good at everything. We did everything from computer, Photoshop. There were people on the course who were fashion designers, painters, printmakers, sculptors, architects. And so you got not only a completely cross-disciplinary, an opportunity to answer briefs in a cross-disciplinary way, we critiqued each other. So when you presented something, you would hear from somebody completely different what they thought your work was about. And that was incredibly refreshing because really starts to break down ideas about what art is and any preconceptions. And one of the things I really realized at that point was it doesn't really matter what art is. People try to come up with their own definitions of it, and I think it's the biggest waste of time. I think what you need to accept is that somebody's work is their work. Whatever their work is, and you know, people were looking at Tracy Emin's bed and going, well, that's not art. And it's like, well, it's her work. It may be, whether you think it's art or not, doesn't really matter. It's the it's her life, and it's her expression of her life and her interpretation and the way that she wants to communicate that. Whether that's art or not doesn't really matter. It's put into an art space because that's the only space it can work, you know. And I think that's when I started to realize that I could do other things than just paint. And I tried painting. I always thought I would be a painter. I remember going to the National Gallery when I was young with my mum and thinking, looking at the Impressionists and thinking they were magical, and I wanted to be that magical being that could create that. My father was also an artist, and I wanted to be like him. And there was a certain magic about it. And I tried painting, and I was like, this is boring. I just didn't connect. I thought I would connect with the paint, you know, that I would really like feel it, and I just didn't at all. I was so disappointed, and I was like, oh god, this is boring. And then when I did my foundation, then you try a little bit of everything. And when we went into the sculpture section and we started messing around with plaster and wax and all kinds of stuff, and I started doing all this stuff, and the tutors were like, what are you doing with that wax? That's not what you're meant to do. And I was like, I'm just gonna do what I'm doing, don't worry about me. And then I'd make something and they'd be like, wow, you've just reinvented wax in 2 days. And I'm like, I know. And it was just that sense of experimenting and wanting to play and take a material and push it to its extremes and figure out what I could do with it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And that was, I guess, that scientific side of me, wanting to experiment, wanting to create something different, or see a material and understand it or be it. So I would put my mind, I would imagine I was the material. What would happen to me if I heated it, or if I punctured it, or, you know, did all these different kind of things? What would happen to me? So I kind of tried to imagine the forces and the acting on different materials. And I guess when I went to my degree, that continued until I was studying land art for my dissertation.
Land art.
Land art
is so Andy Goldsworthy using leaves and the environment to create work. Richard Long, who would use mud and paint with that, but he also did something really interesting where he walked across a field back and forth until he wore the groove in the grass, and then took a picture of that. But the piece itself was the work, but the evidence that's shown in the gallery is the photograph. So this is lots of questions again about representation and what you can do with the natural environment and how you work there. And I remember seeing a piece called The Lightning Fields, which I believe was Walter de Maria, and it's these metal rods in the American desert, which is an area of very high lightning. And you go and you stay in a hut, and you can walk out into the field where all these rods are, and if you're lucky and a storm passes overhead, the lightning will be drawn to these rods.
Uh-huh.
And I actually made a pilgrimage there one year, which was amazing. But that when I heard about that piece, it was kind of like this idea that you can connect with these incredibly powerful forces of nature. Lightning is an explosion. And so that made me think about how I can connect with nature. And I had ideas about making radio waves that traverse the earth, and until a solar wind would interrupt it and destroy it and die, and it would die. Is that a work of art? I remember writing in my piece, in my sketchbook, is this art? And then I wrote, who cares? It doesn't matter. Like, it's an idea. It's something that I wanted to express or create. And it doesn't, if you think about what art is, you'll never really be true to your what you really want to do. And I guess at a certain point, I started to, I wanted to drop bombs on the landscape. A lot of things came together. You know, these epiphany moments where it's not one thing, but you had a conversation here, you found out about an artist there, And I'd spoken to a friend of mine who was doing chemistry, and he said that he'd been setting off car bombs when he was young, and or he'd made his own bombs and things like that. And I found that really unexpected from this quite nerdy guy who was studying chemistry. And I'd seen this piece, another artwork that inspired me, by Isamu Noguchi, which is Man to be Seen from Mars. And it never was a real artwork. It was a proposal, and the idea was to create a face in the desert that could be seen from Mars. So the nose was over a mile long, and he was very disillusioned with the Cold War, and he felt that it would be a legacy of humankind left after we destroyed ourselves. And for me, that gave me this kind of overview effect, which a lot of people talk about, that astronauts get when they go up into space and they look back at Earth, and they get this sense of asking themselves, well, who are we? What are we doing? You know, and how delicate the planet is. And I think that the power of that work is that it takes us away from the Earth and makes us look back at ourselves. And I think there were so many things about these different artworks and things that I'd seen, and I wanted to use something powerful that humans use as a tool, a bomb, for example, and use it in a way that is still very powerful and utilizing its power, but deciding how to use it in a way that's beautiful and good. Because really, you shouldn't be scared of a bomb. You should be scared of the person who signs the paper to say that that bomb is going to drop on other people, that's going to kill people. Somebody designs that. Somebody goes out into the world with the intention that they want to kill thousands of people. And I think I always, from a very young age, was interested in ideas of intention and human intention and why people hurt each other. I've always wondered that. Why do people hurt each other? Why do people kill each other? Why do people do good things or bad things? What is it about a human that makes that decision so clear? And there are people who've been through the most horrific atrocities, but they have nothing but love to give. And there are people who've had the most privileged lifestyle, and they just find it no problem at all to kill lots of people, or they get damaged by what's happened to them and replicate the behavior. So I'm very interested in that. But I guess that was my way of wanting to express in a way those ideas. And that's kind of I think it was very subconscious, because I've only really come to terms with that recently. At the time, I thought I was interested in density and matter and the kind of effects of forces on metal. And I did lots of work. I started experimenting. I couldn't drop bombs on the landscape. It was a bit ambitious for my degree work. So I was very lucky. I did that thing of looking up the yellow pages, right? So I kind of found a whole bunch of people that I called up, seeing if I could do a course or learn. And I came across the International School for Search and Explosive Engineers, now called Safety and Explosive Engineers. But I called them up and I said, I'm interested in this course. And they were like, well, who are you? And I'm like, well, I'm an art student. And they were like, why don't you come down and visit? And I think at the time, I thought they wanted me to go and visit to see if it would be suitable for them. But now I know better, and I think they probably wanted to figure out who I was and make sure that I wasn't some weird terrorist that wanted to do a course in explosives. So I went there, and I had one of these moments. The principal showed me around and told me about the course and gave me some books to read. And he said, well, read these books and then let me know if you still think it's suitable. And I said, okay, I'm gonna read these books. I'm gonna read up about the course and let you know. And then as I was about to leave, he went, Aoife? And I went, yes. It was really like, yes. And he went, do you have a dream? And I was like, yes. And he said, this is my dream, this university. And he kind of pointed to this artwork on the wall, which kind of had a Native American Indian kind of imagery, and he said, this is my dream. And he explained a little bit about that, and then he sort of let me go. So I went off and I did my reading, and I got back to him and I said, I think this is what I want to do. And he said, okay, you have a scholarship. And that was a real changing point. And it was the first time, I think, that I felt that I was doing something 100% me. You know, it wasn't because I was at school and I happened to be doing something that somebody had showed me that I liked. It was my idea. I'd kind of managed to somehow scrabble to just instinctively weave my way into this situation. And it was 100% what I wanted to do. Mm. And so I went on that course while I was doing my degree and passed, top marks. And then really it kind of went from there. I just started experimenting. I started experimenting with metals, with clay, with plaster, with different shapes, with different connections. And that really was a very busy experimental time, and started to shape the work that I made later on. Mm.
So let me just jump in quickly, because we'll come back to that, of course, and what you're both doing now. But just an anecdote. I'm not sure if I've even told you this, Alex. So you mentioned Tracy M in there. Well, I said that there's two of us in our family who are pilots, and then I became an astronomer. My other brother is an artist, and he went to college with Tracy. So he was a good friend in the early days. And there's another famous piece of work that got burned in the Saatchi fire, which is the tent, with the name sewn on the inside of everybody she ever slept with at that point. And indeed, my brother's name is on the inside, spelt wrongly. But and I saw this was when I was living in Berlin. It came, the show, the Young British Artists show came to the Hamburger Bahnhof, which is an art gallery on the outskirts of Berlin. And so I was just sticking my head in, and it was a kind of an odd moment to see your own brothers on the name on the inside of. I mean, I don't even think, I have no idea under what basis they slept in the same bed, because she had everybody she had slept with. It wasn't necessarily a sexual thing, but maybe it was. But so yeah, it's kind of, for me, that was interesting as well, because in our family, art was always important. And one went to be an airline pilot, one went to be an astronomer, but the other an artist. So it's kind of fascinating inversion. I was not very artistic, but my middle brother was. So here's my question. So the clear difference between the two of you, in a sense, is that in a way, Kat, your art is sort of permanent. It's there. It's to be seen. It's to look at, to be appreciated. Whereas Aoife, yours is transient. It exists in the moment, and then is gone in a way. Not necessarily, it can leave remnants, of course, if you explode something and bend the metal. But I think the question that's there for both of you is, how much interpretation do you want to place on your art as opposed to the participants, the viewers? Is it important to you that there be something that people take away from what you do? Or is it, as you said, Aoife, that it's the question of what is art and what's not art is irrelevant if it's somebody's work?
I would say that, not that I like to define art, but I really feel like art itself is the meaning and the message behind it, or the emotional experience of experiencing it. And the craft side is the actual, just, the fine art of the painting it. And that's generally how I like to separate these. For me, I'm actually not that worried about what people think or what message they get from it, because I think that looking at space images, at least for me, or in particular for like my biggest project, building a chandelier of the Milky Way galaxy, I just kind of want to give people an experience of something they might not have access to. In particular, 99% of people in Europe and the US and 87% of people globally live under light pollution so bad that they can probably see less than 2% of the stars. So people aren't having that experience of, they might see it in books or on documentaries or films, but we've never had a time where we're more disconnected from the night sky. So for me, I just want to show people, and because I think that then it gives them the opportunity to sit and wonder, because I feel like the whole of human history was sat under the stars wondering where we come from and what it all means. But I only want to give people the opportunity to ask big questions. I don't necessarily want to define what those big questions are, because I think depending on where you are in life, it changes. So someone might experience something when they, and I've certainly had this with people looking at my own artwork, or at least what they tell me, is that at some points, you know, someone might want the artwork just literally as a form of escape. You know, very hectic life. We live in like concrete jungles, you know, and traffic jams, or at least we did until Corona, or at least quarantine, let's say. And I had someone commission a painting that was just because he wanted it to put in a room so that he could feel like he was on a spaceship. It was like, that's wonderful. Like it was just a window in a spaceship. I love that. But then other people that use it in all, like, imagine it in all different ways. I don't know about you, Aoife. How do you feel about your artwork when it comes to this?
I think it depends. I mean, yeah, I mean, I had a really, again, another kind of epiphany moment when I was at uni. Because when you're at university, especially St. Martin's, you know, it's very critical based, and conceptually, you have to be quite strong, whatever the work you make. And so you do, and I personally really enjoy the conceptual side of work, and I love to learn about the artist's ideas, about critics' interpretations, about audience interpretations. So to me, that is a part of the work that I enjoy, but it's also a part of the work that is and like a kind of an addition. And so, I mean, I was making some work when I displayed my first explosive pieces, which were big sheets of metal and ripped with detonating cord. So in that sense, they're not completely destroyed. I do have some objects that are sellable and you can hang on your wall. And the people who reacted really strongly were the people who had quite powerful moments in their lives of big change. And people who had been in war situations as well would come up and say how much they loved the piece. And one woman came up to me and she was kind of crying and telling me about her husband who had died. And, you know, the people start to tell you all these really deeply personal things, and none of them were about the ideas that I had or that I had written on my little plaque or whatever. And I remember at some point saying, oh yeah, that's interesting, this is what I thought it was about. And they couldn't hear a word that I said. They just had their own idea. And at first I was a bit confused about this, because you're really taught that you're meant to convey your concept. And but at the same time, I kind of went, hang on a minute, this is a gift, because people are really sharing something very deeply personal with me, and it's quite powerful. And that is the most valuable thing about the work. And so I learned that you have to let people have their own idea about the work, and you shouldn't try to force that conceptual side. And I think in some ways also, Kat, I've also had this sort of parallel career where I've always run events. I run big parties and festival stages and dance theatre. I ran a theatre company. So I've been a producer, and I've run stages with DJs and bands. And so that side also has brought me into sort of immersive theatre world, where you guide people through, and this is relevant to the European Space Agency piece, where we took everyone to a warehouse on coaches. They entered this dark space. We didn't tell them anything. We just gave them a mask and what else did we give them? Eye goggles, a mask, and earplugs if they wanted to use them. And they sat in the dark and just waited, and we just let them wait there for a while until they sort of forgot about where they were and started to settle into the space. And then we triggered certain explosions, and then certain things happened, and then a door would open and they'd go through to the next space, and then they you know, rain fire would fall down and a furnace came up, and then another piece came out, and then the big garage door behind them would open up, and somebody with a flare would lead them into a field. And so no, I didn't want to give them anything. You know, they sat in the middle of the field, and then fire bombs went all around them in a pulsing sensation. And yes, that was mimicking an X-ray binary system in a way. I was creating this sort of pulse, like one was stationary and another one was going around it, and every time the one that was around came close to the other one, a huge explosion would go off into the sky, which would sort of mimic this X-ray ejection of X-rays that we detect on Earth. And that's how we know so much about these systems. But you know, I didn't want them to be clouded by like, well, this is an X-ray binary system that I'm experiencing. No, I want them to feel the heat on their face. I want them to feel like they're in the middle of a system, and what that feels like, what that might feel like in your imagination. And I think that sense of awe of space is what I'm trying to recreate. You know, when we think about space, we're just completely, like you said, mind-bending, and to give someone a mind-bending experience, a kind of something that actually feels quite emotional, I think, and to enhance that experience.
I would agree with the idea of like enhancing that feeling of awe. And I think a lot of us who get into space, I think children are naturally really into space because they find accessing awe really easy. Whereas I think, you know, a lot of adults are a little bit more constrained. So the fact that you're giving people that experience, I think is wonderful.
Yeah, I have to say that as one of the people in the audience at the Starstorm show, I mean, it was exactly that. It was that sense of not knowing what was coming next. Yes, I mean, the astronomer was trying to interpret because I knew it came from you working with us. But at some point, you just sort of let go of that. And, you know, it's not only about awe, though. I will say you terrified the crap out of most of the people in the audience when that plexiglass box started. I mean, it was hanging in the ceiling, because you remember you said a warehouse. What it was if I remember correctly, it was a place on the outskirts of Linz where the fire brigade test fireproof materials and so on. So the whole building was set up to have these kind of explosions in, and yet that plexiglass cube, what was it, a meter or so in size, with fireworks going off on the inside.
Yeah, 1.2 meters. That was inspired by two things. One was the idea of the protection that's inherently built into our universe. So, you know, we've got a magnetosphere around the Earth. The solar system has a heliosphere, and then our galaxies have halos. So I called it Halo. And then the other idea was also not related specifically to the science, but related to how scientists work. When they build models of the universe, they build these black boxes, which is a bit of a kind of oxymoron, because you're trying to create something that's limitless, but yet you do this, you know, 3-dimension black box. And I think I wanted to create something that's trying to escape from that, but also something that was safe, but felt very dangerous.
Yeah, didn't feel very safe. I just thought, you know, in the UK, forget that never would have passed any, but it was, it was brilliant.
It would. I mean, the thing is, I do the health and safety for these things. I have to do all the tests, and because there's nobody doing what I do, I'm the expert. And so I have to say when something is safe. And yes, of course, the fire departments generally come and they look over my health and safety sheets and all my risk assessments, but they don't know that what I'm doing is safe. They don't really know, because they didn't do the tests. I did the tests, and I have to, and so that falls on me whether that is safe for the audience. But there are lots and lots of things I do to make sure it is safe. But I do put my warning signs on.
Yeah.
Come to my event, there is a warning sign. There will be loud noise, and there will be smoke, and there will be fire. And if you need to leave, you can tell one of the stewards and they'll take you out.
But I think what's so interesting, and it's come up in different ways, and Mark and I have talked about this at length, which is, what is the deep interconnection between art, music, science? And I think it's just because looking at the night sky, it creates two responses. There's an immediate intellectual response, you know, what's out there, what's over the next hill, and that goes back to the earliest origins of humanity. But then there's also, just like as Kat was saying, just a simple wow factor. But there are other implications as well, right? You know, not just that it's beautiful, but it's also, is it a void? Is there anyone out there? Are all those fundamental questions also come out of it? And I suppose that's why it's so provocative. So I mean, I have a sense that, you know, I know what you guys will think to my question, but do you think that art has a vital role to play in conveying these big ideas? Because of course, so much of space exploration isn't just about space. It's also how we see ourselves, how we see the fragility of Earth, you know, the fragility of our environment and so on. Should art be elevated into, I guess, a more important role in conveying these ideas?
Absolutely. So for me, I think almost, you mentioned earlier, almost all communications about science are literally done through art, whether it's the art of creating these diagrams and so on, or whether it's creating something that just gives people the experience or the mental space to contemplate these bigger ideas. And I always go back to and to explain how important a single vision might be. I love this. My brother is a massive nerd, God bless him, and he had a magazine when he was quite young. And I'm pretty sure it was a PC mag, and it said something like, the 386, can we get any faster? Of course, you know, amazing, really. And inside it was a picture of a vase, and underneath it said that it was computer generated. And he was so fascinated by it, he had to know how that worked. It created such a like what is this? How is it even made? That he then went on to learn how to do 3D graphics, but that wasn't enough. He then had to learn how to make shaders, which are the programs we use to interpret, great word, Kat, interpret what the mesh is doing and how the photons are interacting with it. And then he didn't need to know more, so then he learned how to code, and like now he's making VR simulators for doctors to take them through medical simulations so that when they come to treat people, obviously they don't kill them. He's saved hundreds of thousands of people's lives. That started from a picture of a vase. That picture of vase went on to save hundreds of thousands of people's lives, which is phenomenal. And I think at least I would love, if ever possible, that through the art that myself or even Aoife's doing, that someone is inspired to then go on and, you know, do something really impactful in the world. And I think now more than ever, our need to not just connect with space, but, you know, not just that we need to connect with space, but obviously look after our own planet, is more and more important as population grows. And I think that the other good thing that I would really like to say about art is that science can be very confrontational for people, in particular in the age where, you know, no one really, I mean, this is true anywhere, no one wants to appear stupid. And sometimes reading a very dry, you know, science paper, you know, people often avoid those things because they don't want to appear like they don't really know what they're talking about. No one does. Art is this beautiful thing where you can literally explain a concept and people can understand it without being or having that you know, without having to come in there with a level of understanding. You don't have to have a list of prerequisite understanding to look at a piece of art and experience it. You can be at any point, and the beauty is, and in particular, like obviously I'm biased against love and space art, but the beauty of it, you know, anything like that, is that it doesn't matter what age or creed or background or anything that you come from, it can connect with you. And I certainly hope that to see a more continuing use of art to communicate these ideas, because I mean, most people, as you say, like they get into space because they've seen these phenomenal images, and I would probably argue that almost anyone that images space, even on a scientific side, is in themselves an artist. And in fact, actually most of the scientists I know are artists. They're artists of trying to bend and understand reality, because I think art and space come from the same place, which is this kind of sense of wonder about things. How about you, Aoife?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's one of the things. I think everyone's an artist. And, you know, I think wasn't that a famous Picasso quote? He said, everyone's an artist. We just unlearn it. We unlearn how to be. And I think everybody's everything. And I think this comes maybe for you as well, this kind of polymathic nature that we're kind of those people that wants a bit of everything. But yeah, I wrote a paper for the International Astronautical Congress entitled, "Can Artists Influence the Future of Space Culture Beyond Design?" And I guess what I was asking is, can artists influence what it is going to be like to live on the moon, to live on Mars, more than just designing you know, the space? And kind of, I think artists are very critical. We're one of the most widely educated people, because art can be inspired by many things, and artists get very obsessed by certain subjects, and you'll find artists in every part of life exploring every part of what humanity is and what it has to offer and how it functions. And I think that they are very critical of society, they're very critical of everything, and I think they're very powerful in creating change and creating dialogue, asking questions. A lot of artists say the job of an artist is to ask questions. I agree to an extent. I also think we all, as citizens of this planet, need to find answers. So I think it can be a bit of a cop-out saying that. So I sometimes get annoyed when artists say that. I'm like, no, our job isn't just to ask questions. That's a part of it. But we do. Who do you think is going to come up with a better answer? Like, we all have to come up with answers. But yeah, I mean, if artists weren't powerful, if they weren't able to influence others, then they wouldn't be persecuted when in dictatorships. They wouldn't be restricted. Ai Weiwei wouldn't have been locked up for 81 days, you know, in China. So we are powerful. We do change the world. And I think in terms of space, that's part of inspiration, getting people involved. And I think there is a lot of can be misconceptions about space, I think, and working in space. People are like, well, why should we go to space? What are we doing? We're polluting everything. And there is that side of it. But there is also a lot of Earth observation, which we wouldn't know that the ice caps are melting if it wasn't for the satellites in space that are proving that and tracking that year on year. So yeah, I think what the artist's role is in that is really up to the individual artist. So we all do it in different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that just depends on how you want to do it, whether it's creating an experience and making people feel more connected to themselves, to nature, to space, and wanting to be inspired to protect it. I think, yeah, there are many ways of doing it, but I definitely believe that it's possible.
Yeah, I said earlier on that my brother is a real artist, let's say, but I suppose, you know, hearing you kind of admonishing me for saying I'm not an artist, because we all are, and I'm a frustrated artist, I suppose. I mean, I'm one of the people indeed whose sort of astronomical career has depended on making beautiful images of space from giant telescopes, whether on the ground or in space, and there's absolutely a creative element to doing that, not being satisfied with just pulling out a number to satisfy a scientific equation, but saying this is a representation of space. It's my job to sort of take out the joins and take out the false bits because they're not real, right? To remove the veil, and you know, working with musicians as well, as is, you know, that's what Space Rock's one of the main motivations, working with artists, filmmakers. So I see that very strongly. But I wanted just to come back quickly to you, Aoife, because you, as the artist in residence at the European Space Agency a few years ago, you worked not only on your own, but of course came in to talk to the scientists, but then started talking to them to persuade them to see the universe in a different way. And I think that, you know, maybe some of us were already in that direction, but not everybody was. So I'd be interested to hear how you felt that actually went. Not only change, you know, how we use art to represent the world outside, but how, in essence, opening the minds of scientists to the use of art in their own work, let alone in outreach.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky, and I was very, very privileged to spend quite a lot of time at ESTEC. And I think also I worked with a great team, like the communications team, Karen and Claudia, because I think traditionally artists go into scientific institutions and they learn and they see what's around them and maybe they collect some data and then they go off and make artwork. But I think I wasn't sure what to expect from the residency, whether I would be allowed to take part in science or do anything like that. And in this case, I couldn't do anything like that, but I could, that has led to opportunities to be able to go back and do more scientific based work. But I think at the time I was able to persuade them to let me do open door sessions where scientists would come together and talk about my ideas and sort of interpret what I was doing and have feedback and let me know what their responses were and maybe tie in some of their ideas. I did a workshop with some of the scientists and staff at ESTEC called Make Your Mark, which was really about exploring the individual contribution to the collective knowledge expansion in science and space especially, but really got them to reconnect with what their original intentions were when they started working. And I think at that stage and at that level, a lot of scientists get very removed from that. They get very removed, and there are actually I asked a lot of scientists at ESTEC whether they felt their work had an impact on the world? And many of them said no. They didn't think that their work was that important in changing the world, or, you know, and I found that amazing, because I was there thinking, oh my God, your work's so amazing. This is so important for the world. And of course, there is a whole process of writing papers, and those papers get published, and who's going to read them. But at the same time, all of those little contributions create this collective knowledge where if somebody wants to do something, they can look up and find the right papers. And sometimes that comes to fruition quickly. You'll see how your work influences something else, and sometimes it won't be till 40 years later that your work triggers something else and creates another breakthrough. And there's also this cross-generational, you know, Oliver Jenrich, is it?
Jenrich, yeah.
Yeah, he's working on LISA mission,
yeah.
So gravitational waves in space. But his mission started before he was a student. He got onto it, I think, when he was at Edinburgh University, and it will only launch after he retires. So this is really interesting, because you put your life into something and you don't know what the result. He puts his life into that. Somebody else put their life in before him. And when he retires, somebody else will put their life into that work. And when it launches, the data will come back, and new lives, new students will then go on to study that. And those findings will feed something else. And I find this incredibly fascinating. So I made this workshop, which really kind of, I think, allowed them to tap back into what they really believed in, what they wanted to achieve with their careers, their child, connect, you know, we've all got these stories from childhood, reconnect with those, reconnect with each other, and learn how to use art as a facilitator to do that. So a lot of the techniques I used, they can use again. And I also made another event which was much more open. Anyone at STech could do it. It was outside the lunch area in the kind of exhibition space, and people would come along and they'd smash a piece of paper, an artwork, with a lemon bomb, which is what I use when I can't use real explosives. So I use these little lemon bombs, and then you leave it to dry and you use a heat gun, and then the patterns that come up are really kind of explosive and beautiful. And so, yeah, you kind of get people to use that moment to create a kind of moment of change. So they can say a word and like create an idea, and it's a kind of ceremony in a way. I mean, it's fun, it's kind of interactive, but it's also a kind of point of intention and creating a moment of intention that they can carry with them. And so these like techniques they can take away with them. It really depended on how involved people got. Yeah. Some people didn't want to get involved. They were like, no, I don't have time for this, I'm sorry. And then by the end they were like, this is really interesting, I'm gonna this is fun, you know. And I think being there over durationally gave more people more time to engage, and slowly I think people started to understand the value of that.
Well, and I'll say, you know, people have been influenced by that, because people have come to those of us, you know, who are kind of involved in that, setting that program up and saying, can we do this again? Right. And we will be doing an artist in residence program, although of course with the coronavirus, will it truly be in residence? Will it be kind of remote? The details need to be worked out, but it's something we're just about to start again with Karen and others. So yeah, it's been a few years, but that it's still there in people's memories, and some of the pictures are still on the walls as well. So I was sort of wanted to bring it over to Kat then. In that case, have you worked closely with scientists? I mean, you have a technical background, of course, so much of the sort of you have a basis for what you're doing just out of your own head. But have you felt it's been important to sit down with people? So you're based in Australia, right? So people there or people elsewhere?
I'm actually now in England, so right. We're traveling around a little bit. Yeah, so my plan was always to make really large-scale art pieces for public, you know, for public display. So the thing that I'm working on at the moment is building a chandelier. I mentioned it earlier, using the Gaia mission, ESA Gaia mission data. And I just really wanted to make a massive, it always occurred to me that whenever we see the Milky Way, it's just this abstract strip of light in the sky, if you are lucky enough at all to even see it. And I really wanted to give people a more visceral 3D experience of like what it is to observe our own galaxy, and have like an overview effect, but from an even greater distance, as this is our Milky Way. And also, I think someone said something quite poignant to me, is that every time you go into a natural history museum and you see a gigantic dinosaur, which is absolutely fine, but how much better would it be if you walked in and it was a gigantic galaxy? So we're currently building, it's a 8-meter diameter chandelier built from crystal clear resin that we are taking the data from the Gaia mission, and we're calculating it into a density map and then running it through a fractal generating AI is probably the most accurate way, but it creates these structures based on code that we write. Somewhere cross between a snowflake and an atom, if you can imagine it, and then suspended from thousands of fiber optics. And I like to describe it as kind of like a dinner plate with like string and tennis balls, but significantly more complex than that.
And more beautiful.
Yeah, right. Just at the base level. And obviously building this in segments and having fun with it.
Has that involved? I'm just curious. Then it's not meant as a sort of any criticism. Have you worked with people in the Gaia team to do that, or has that been through people? Because it's all public data, of course, right? But
that's correct. Yeah. So I have been in touch, and I'm working with 2 of the data scientists that are helping to interpret it. But no one's really interpreted the data in this way before, because of course, really the focus wasn't necessarily to create something that was visually appealing, and of course the biggest challenge with Gaia is of course that there are massive amounts of like dust clouds that are blocking huge amounts of the Milky Way galaxy. Of course, there's so a lot of it is going to be left up to sort of an artistic interpretation, which is going to be combining different papers. So I've been talking to a few scientists from the Chinese university, and they were doing a lot of studies based on the warping of the Milky Way. So we're going to be incorporating, we're going to be bringing together all of these different people, and we have up to this point having these large scale meetings discussing what is the Milky Way galaxy when it's in 3D, like how does that feel? And then, of course, so it's nice to be able to bring lots of disciplines together, from the 3D graphic side of things, which is something that I've got a lot of experience, to the algorithmic code, through to scientists. And then obviously we're doing a lot of materials testing at the moment, and a lot of 3D printing, which is a lot of fun. It's really, really great. So.
How would, maybe you're not able to say it yet, but how will we be able to see this in the end? I mean, it's 8 meters across. Is there a space where it's envisaged, where you'll be able to look at it from different angles? Because I don't imagine it's going to move around. So you need, as the viewer, to look at different angles.
I always had this vision that it be suspended in a gigantic warehouse and have like pads on the floor that have rollers, so you can just lie back and roll around. I think that would be quite fabulous. There is no place for it to do. So I knew that I wanted to build it, and I knew that I was going to donate it to a science or a museum or art gallery or so. I don't know where it's going. I just was so compelled. I have very, very strong visions of things, and I'm sure Aoife's the same. And if a vision sticks with me for years and years, I literally have to go and build it. And this is just one of those.
Or maybe we should talk afterwards, because I can think of lots of people who might be very interested in exhibiting that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I found when I was talking to I spoke to a few different museums, is that majority of them said, we can't afford to produce something this big, because, just materials alone, $250,000. So I am raising this money myself through my own art sales, and then using it to divert to I currently have a team of 9 people working to actually build this, but not just build this, but also, organize the finances for it also. And, there are scientists that I employ to, work with to help organize these things. And actually coming from the weirdest places, we've got a scientist that specializes in wastewater management. So flow of poop is really as an unofficial title, but amazing computing data. And So it's funny how you can bring people together to do something really cool.
And I mean, it sounds absolutely fascinating. But I suppose continuing that theme of bringing people together, there was something you said previously, and Aoife also echoed in a different way. And it's something that Mark and I think have a huge amount of experience with the kind of events that we put on, is inspiring a sense of wonder in kids, and for adults, reawakening a sense of wonder, and that's one thing that I think we've seen is generations brought together, just like, parents and their children, different generations all kind of just going, wow, and I suppose that sense, Mark, I mean, that is the very basis of science, isn't it? It's saying wow, but then proceeding to the next logical step, which is to say, well, what is that, right? I mean, that's the role to me of art in so many ways, is to kind of, I guess, tap that nerve that makes people want to go and figure things out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, highly inappropriate thing to say, but maybe scientists are just OCD artists. We go so far and then just have to take it to pieces and go to the next level. No, and I think what's interesting is we this is one of the reasons that Space Rocks is so important to me and to Alex, I know, is that we are set on these tracks too early in our lives, right? That when you're under 5, all of these things are the same. You don't call them art, you don't call them science, you don't call them, you don't call them poop management. In fact, they're all the same thing. They're just life, right? They're about being curious about the way the world is and how you engage with it, because that's a fundamental part of learning how to deal with it. And I think, unfortunately, these divisions, you're a scientist, you're an artist, you're this, you're that, they get set in too early. And indeed, it's sort of not respectable to do this, or I'm not good enough at that, or I've been told I can't do this because I'm this or I'm that. And we've had lots of people in Space Rocks who've said, very early on, I was told I could not be one of these.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, right? Or, you can't paint, therefore you can't be an artist. Or you're not very good at maths, but we've got a rubbish teacher, frankly. Everybody can do maths. It's not, So I think that idea of bringing these things back together, because it is the only way we will solve these challenges which we face, is actually not by dividing between artists and scientists, between people on that side of the pond and this people on the side, and this person who grew up there and that person who grew up there. I know it's all very ideal, but it seems absolutely clear to me, at least, that bringing people back together again and reawakening things which are implicit in us all when we're young has to be what scientists do. Not just sitting down, making equations, but saying, what's the consequence? What does it mean, either philosophically or materially? Same with artists, right? The reopening people's eyes, just saying, it's okay to just go out there and stare at the tree with the squirrel, and just look at it and say, what's the squirrel experiencing right now? There is a squirrel, by the way. But
I've been watching the squirrels as well as a cat.
We've got red ones where I live. Unfortunately, you've probably got those monstrous grey things, but
yes, we do.
We've got the cute ones, the cute little tree rats.
Well, I'm conscious that one of the areas of Space Rocks that we haven't actually broached with both of you, although you've both conveyed a real background in music, is what do you guys listen to when you're making all this? Is there a soundtrack to the work that you're creating?
I go between very, very ethereal sort of synthy to like intense hard techno, and it's just it's like we're doing these very delicate things with a ta 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 in the background, and just a massive fan of live heavy metal music as well. I think that I'm either 0 or 100 miles an hour. I think that's really how I would like to sum my tastes up. So if I ever made a playlist for people, they'd be like, wow, you're all over the place. But
we do have a Spotify channel. You're more than welcome to send us a playlist and we'll put it out there for people.
I like two things really, is that sense of otherworldliness, however that's created, and this sense of pure intensity, and between those two, however I'm feeling.
Give us some names. Go on, let's take the moment. I mean, not to put you on the spot, but
okay, so as far as techno, I really like Frontal, his name's very, very great techno artist. one of my absolute favorites. As far as synthwave, oh man, I'm gonna have to come up. I'm gonna have to look at my playlist.
Oh, it's fine.
Thanks. But yeah, I really like hardstyle as well. So I like to listen to Frontliner and Zotox and so on as well. So that's all that kind of stuff too.
Cool. Very good. Aoife.
Well, weirdly, I mean, I'm a dancer, so I dance as well. I've danced on lots of festival stages and things like that, and I run big festival things. So I love listening to all kinds of music, from electro swing. I'm a big drum and bass fan. But weirdly, when I work on my art, I need silence. I like to work in silence. And when I was writing, if I'm writing, it's either classical music or drum and bass. If I'm just, listening to music, when I'm thinking, like if I'm just doing thinking work, which I do quite a lot of mental visualization, where I just sit there thinking, and it looks like I'm not doing any work, but I'm really busy doing lots of work in my head.
Can I use that? Can I use that line in the future? It looks like I'm not doing anything. But
looks like I'm not doing anything, but I'm really working quite hard.
I'd just like to interrupt and say that actually the being a visionary and like that imagination process is like the birth of all creation, and absolutely it is work.
Yeah. No, I agree. I was being very facetious. I spend an awful lot of time just staring at space.
Yeah, so I think some of my sort of dreamy kind of thinking about space, thinking about art, music, at the moment I've got a little playlist with like Tom Middleton, Caribou, let's have a look. Eva Ray. I'm looking at my thing right now, Bonobo, Bayan,
you haven't hit
LCD
one thing.
Sound System, Fortet.
You haven't hit one thing on my playlist yet, so there's lots for me to listen to.
Well, let me just tell you my favorite ones at the moment as well is where has it gone? Even some like Bicep and stuff, Fever Ray, yeah, that kind of stuff. And yeah, that's my dreamy space music.
Very good. Well, I think we're going to have to follow up after this and probably get your playlists. I think we'd be really curious, and we love putting stuff like that. And
John Hopkins.
Oh, absolutely.
100% John Hopkins.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I mean, there's so many ideas to explore, and I think like in so many interactions that Mark and I have had in the brief life of Space Rocks, it feels less like crossing paths and more like bringing people into the fold in a way. And I hope that this won't be the last time that we have a chance to share ideas and collaborations and all that, because there's so much here to explore, and I wish that we had more time. But for now, on behalf of everyone at Space Rocks, I've got to say thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little more about your world. And we're fairly scientific, but Mark, we do have some traditions, right?
Oh, we do, yes. So lockdown's been cruel to all of us, so we've all had to come up with stupid things to distract us and not watch the news and worry about what the government's doing this week. So yes, we have our little way of saying goodbye to everybody, and it's a test because if we don't let people know in advance. So we have a hand signal, which is this. This is the Vulcan salute, which is live long and prosper. Okay, and it's important, as Alex has learned by me admonishing him over months, that the thumb be to one side.
And I'm the insane Trek fan, but yeah, here we go.
Yeah, exactly. So so it's space on this side, the Vulcan salute, and then the horns on this side, which is Space Rocks. So
very good. Well,
perfect. Well done, both.
I used to get this wrong. I used to always do that.
Like, that is a different one, but yeah.
That's the Hawaiian hang loose, right? So there's a segment on the news. I used to go to Hawaii a lot when I was a student, using the telescopes there, and every single news broadcast they just go out into Hawaii and have somebody doing the hang loose thing. So there's like a million ways of hanging loose, but no, rock.
But maybe it's a new brand extension. Well, guys, an absolute pleasure to have you aboard, and we'll hope to cross paths again very soon indeed. Okay, thank you so much again.
Thank you both. Bye-bye now.
Well, Mark, there we go. It feels like just the beginning of a journey with both Aoife and with Kat. So many stimulating ideas, and I have to say, we should probably be pulling people's playlists, because there are a bunch of recommendations in there that I
Yeah.
explore.
Things I haven't listened to, and I like both their artworks. So why wouldn't I like the music that inspires those artworks? Because I'm challenged now to think about ways of, when we get Space Rocks back on the road again and have live events, to set the show up that we can have an 8-meter wide model of the Milky Way as a chandelier on one hand, and then have explosions going off in the other corner. We can probably arrange that, right? There's enough explosives and pyro in most rock shows. Maybe it's about time we had some.
What's not to love? That sounds absolutely And so I'll encourage everyone who is watching to follow us on our newsletter. Just go to spacerocksofficial.com and join us for future episodes of Uplinks. Thanks so much for joining us, and to Aoife and Kat for sharing their time. We'll see you soon, Mark. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Alex. See you all. Bye.